Welcome to You Can Do It. I'm your host, Chris, and in this video, I'm going to be repairing my Fein tool oscillating cutter. It doesn't appear to be working properly on the spindle part here. It's not cutting the way it used to. So stay tuned, and I'll show you how you can do it. So I was on a job, and I went to use the Fein tool, and it was working fine, and then all of a sudden, the oscillating part here, it just stopped working the way it was. It just wasn't cutting. I had a new blade in it and it just wasn't cutting right. Here, I'll turn it on so you can kind of get an idea. The motor works. It sounds solid. It's just that this part here, the spindle and the oscillating cutter, it just isn't working right. So let's turn it on. All right, so we've obviously got something going on here. So I'm going to open this up. I've had this tool for probably 12, 13 years. It's done me good. It's done a lot of cutting. Now, I have had some issues here. There's 4 screws that are down in here. I'm going to take the casing off, and they seem to loosen up over time. So I'm not quite sure why that happens. But I'm going to take it apart. I have a feeling it's probably right here in this area again, but I've never actually taken the whole casing apart. I usually am able to just get my torque bit in here and tighten them up. But I can see that one of the screws is gone. So let's go ahead and open this up and see what we can find. I'm going to go ahead and unplug it first. You don't want to work on it when it's plugged in. So I'm going to be using a T15 torque screw to get all these screws out that you can see here in the casing. There's about six screws that you'll be taking out with the T15 tool or bit. So it fits in there nice and tight. So I'm going to go ahead and take all 6 of these screws out of the casing. All right, I got all 6 screws. They're right here. They're out of the casing. So I'm just going to carefully pull this apart. All right, so I can obviously see right here, this whole thing, it's just come undone. This screw here, it's not even in all the way. I'm missing a screw right here that holds the head onto the housing. See if we can pull this thing out of here. So I did go ahead and take a few pictures of this so I see how it sits in there. It's always a good thing, unless you have the PDF file that shows the parts list and how this thing goes together. But I just took a few pictures just so I can kind of get an idea of the inner workings. Now, I've never opened one of these up before, so I'm just trying to fix this myself so I don't have to go out and buy a new one. So let's go ahead and see if we can pull this thing up. So obviously it looks like there's a screw here that holds the cord into the back of the tool, and it's also a T15. So that screw right there. So I'll go ahead and take that off. Okay, so let me bring this out here. Better view. So you can see that this is our main problem here. But I'm going to go ahead and probably dust this off and blow it off with a blower, just get some of the dust out of it. And then we'll see why these screws right here, they just keep coming out. And I can tell that this is probably aluminum here this housing, or the spindle part of the head, and this is plastic. So we got aluminum and plastic, and these screws, they're not staying in here. They're not staying put. So this is now, I think it's the third time that I've had these screws just back out. It happened the first time, and I was able to see it from this angle here of the casing, and I was able to actually tighten them up. But these guys here down at the bottom, they're just straight up missing. So I've only got 2 screws holding that head on, and the other 2, they must have fell out on the job. So I looked in the bag and they're not in there. So I'm going to go ahead and just blow this off, and we'll move on to see if we can come up with a solution here to get new screws, but then also so that these things don't back out. But I'm going to just kind of examine the tool and just see if there's any other major issues that I can see. Now I can see right here that there's a crack where the screw goes into this plastic housing. I don't know if you can see it. Let me get a flashlight here, see if we can. You can see the crack is right there. Right there. So there's a crack in the housing right there, in the plastic housing. This one here looks okay. There's no visible cracks on this one. So I'm looking like right here, this is where the screw goes in from the aluminum housing into the plastic housing, or the aluminum tool head rather, going in where the motor goes. I would think that that would probably be aluminum, but I don't know, maybe they're just trying to make it as lightweight as possible. But see, there's another crack here. So we've got 2 out of the 4 screw holders where the mounting, where the 2 cases mount up. 2 look like they're compromised, and the other 2 look pretty solid. And those are the 2 areas where the screws back out. So these screws here, they just back out of the hole over time. Maybe because it looks like the plastic, it's burned onto these screws. Can't really see it in that photo there, but so this is probably augered out in here. So if I was just going to be tracking parts down, I guess I'd be getting a new housing, depending on what the price of that is. I was just kind of checking around, and I just don't know how involved I want to go as far as replacing all of that. I would probably just go buy a new tool. If I started replacing too many parts here, you just got to add that up and see what that's going to cost and whether or not you want to do it yourself. So before I separate the housing from the tool head here, I'm going to take a Sharpie and I'm just going to flip it over. I'm just going to put an arrow here and one over here, just so I just get stuff lined up. I don't know if you can see that, just so I know how it goes back together. And then also, I'm going to go ahead, I downloaded the PDF file on the actual tool itself on how it goes together. So I'm kind of just looking at the parts, seeing what's available. Like the housing right there, it doesn't even actually have a part number next to it. So I don't even know if I can even get that part from the factory. Now I'm going to go ahead and take the brushes out and the brush holders. So there's 2 screws here in the back. You can see those 2 T15 screw heads. Let me just kind of show them to you here. There's one right there, and then there's one right here. So I'm going to take that screw out, and then the one that's right here, and carefully remove the brush holder, just so we don't ruin them, because if we ruin those, then this thing, I mean, I know you can get those, but it's like, what's the point at that point? You might as well just go buy a new tool. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these, get these out of the way, and then pull the motor out. So there's nothing that's going to mess up the brush holder or the head. So we'll set that screw off to the side. So there's one, and then the other one just popped out. So as soon as I remove the screw, so now I'm going to go ahead and slide the tool out of the housing. So there's our motor. So I'm looking right up here at the fan. There's really no room for error on this when it goes into the housing. Now you can see there's some rub marks on it, mainly because I lost 2 screws, so this thing wasn't sitting probably center in the housing, so it was burning on the fan, but it doesn't look compromised. There's a few spots here where you can see that it's got some burn marks there, because it did kind of start to smoke a little bit, and I think it's mainly because it was burning on the housing. This was rubbing on it. So, but that doesn't look like it's ruined. So if I can come up with the fix on these screws and why they're backing out, and I'll clean this up a little bit. I can see here that it was rubbing here on the motor a little bit, and then maybe, yeah, that looks fine. And then I'll look at the brushes, just kind of look at those, make sure they're not messed up. All right. So basically what I'm going to do here is, in order to keep these screws from backing out, I'm going to take some JB Weld, which is epoxy. I'm going to mix it up, and I'm going to stick JB Weld in here and a little bit on the screws, and I'm going to screw these things down and let them sit overnight. So in doing this, this housing is going to be permanently glued to this thing. So if you want to be able to potentially pull this thing apart over time, you may not want to go this route, but I need this tool next week, and everything else works on it. It's just that these screws back out, and I'm back to the same problem. So this is now the 3rd time I think I've had to go back to the screws and tighten them, but only this time I'm missing 2 screws. So they don't like staying in this tool. So you can see this thing can only really go in one way when you put this thing back together. So I'm going to get some screws, the ones that I'm missing, and mix up some JB Weld and put this thing back together. So while I have this out, I got some really fine sandpaper here. I'm just going to kind of clean up the motor a little bit. I'm not going to sand it real hard. I'm just going to kind of clean it up so it has a good surface, so it makes contact inside. It just has a really clean contact. I just noticed that there was some black marks on where the brushes were making contact. So I'm just cleaning it. I'm not like getting real aggressive here. Just kind of cleaning it up. So that's basically, so it's nice and clean now. There was some black stuff on here. I don't know if it was plastic that had burned onto this, but it's nice and clean. I cleaned out the inside of this. I didn't sand on it. I just blew it out. Just make sure there wasn't any chunks or any plastic in there. It's going to melt down. So I'm going to go ahead and put this thing back together and get it ready to put the screws in. So I just need to line it up. All right. So I've got it back together, lined up my 2 Sharpie marks. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some JB Weld, get my screws ready to install back in. And I've got 2 more screws. I wasn't able to get the actual screws that came with it that are T25. So I've got these screws here. These are just a Phillips screw. It has about the head on it's just slightly bigger than the other. It's got about the same thread pattern there. It's like a coarse thread. I cut the end of the tip off, so it was like a wood screw, but I just cut the end of it off so it's not sharp tip, and these will fit. They're pretty much the same in their threads. So it wasn't too hard to find these. You could probably go to a hardware store and find them, but I just had these laying around and I cut the heads off with a file. So, all right, I'm gonna mix up some JB Weld. So basically JB Weld, it's a 2-part mixture. So you can use this stuff. Stuff's amazing. I use it on all kinds of stuff here and there. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It has a wide range of things you can use it on. I've used it on dirt bike casings that are cracked just for a temporary fix. Out on a trip, that's probably way more than you need, but you want to just have an even amount of both. So one's like a white tan and the other is black, and you're going to mix the two together really good, and it'll end up being kind of a grayish color when you've got it all mixed up. Now this is way more than I needed, but I've got so much of this stuff. Let's see here. Just make sure you don't see any white swirl marks. You just want to make sure it's mixed up really good before you apply it. So now I'm going to apply it right in the crack here, or where the connection is. Now my motor just spun on me, but I'm going to get it right in this area. Just kind of pack it into the hole. I'll give you a better view of what I'm trying to accomplish here. So basically, I'm just trying to pack that hole with as much JB Weld as I can. So when I go to thread the screw in, it's going to adhere to the plastic housing and the screw from backing out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on all 4 holes and then get my screw ready to install it. Okay, so we've got this back together. I'm ready to put the screws in. I've got quite a bit of JB Weld in each one of these holes. So I'm going to go ahead and get as much JB Weld on the screw holes. I mean, it's probably going to ooze out the other end here, or ooze out a little bit, but I don't want to put, I just want to make sure I have enough in there. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and stick the screw in and thread that one in. Go ahead and do the others. So you can see it coming out the other end. It's on my finger now. So I'm going to go ahead and probably put some JB Weld on that crack. But it almost looks like some of it's coming out of that crack. So I'll go ahead and install the other 2. You can kind of see, wipe off the excess so it doesn't go everywhere. I've got the screws back in. The JB Weld installed, and I just kind of cleaned everything up because it was oozing out in a few spots. So I just went back with a rag, cleaned it up. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting the brushes in that I have just dangling here. I'm just going to carefully put those back. So I'll show you how that step goes. Putting the brushes back, you can see that there's a little indentation right here on the actual brush holder. And then there's a little nub that's right here on the casing. You want to line that up with that. And then in doing so, trying to keep the brush inside the brush holder because it is spring loaded. And then it's got these little, kind of like a T-tab here. Well, that's going to have to get down into this groove right here. So let's see, right down in there. So I've got this tool, and so I'm going to kind of help compress. I'm trying to do it with both hands here, but I'm going to try to compress the brush down inside there so when I go to install it, it doesn't keep trying to pop out, because that's the tricky thing. You want to make sure that the brush here is riding on the motor down here. So let's see if I can get that back in there. Okay. Then I'm going to position it, lay it down. Then just make sure it sits nice and flush. There you go. So it's nice and tight. It's down up against the housing. So now I'm ready to install the screw. Now I'm not over tightening these. I'm just kind of snugging them. It is plastic. If you torque it down, you could crack it, and then you're pretty much done, because now the brush isn't on the motor, and so your tool isn't going to work. All right, so we'll go on to the other side here. Same scenario. All right, so I've got the housing or the outer shell here. I've got the motor, all the parts back into the housing. Just make sure that when you're routing the wires, make sure that they're, you've got them tucked away, trained back where they were. Otherwise, you're going to have some issues here. Now, this here, I don't know, I must have done something here to this. So you want to make sure that when you go to put the housing on, it goes on nice and easy. So make sure your wires aren't going to get pinched. They're free from any pinching. Now you'll notice that there's these little round donut pads here, and then there's a nub right here on your housing. That's going to line up right into here. So if something isn't fitting, then you need to pull this back off and check it out. So one thing we need to do is we need to get our extension cord, the power cord back together, get the clip that it holds, the little C-clip here, along with the screw. We'll get that back on. Okay, so now we need to get our switch plate, the switch plate back in place. So you can see the groove down here. You're going to kind of just slide it in. You'll see back here, there's a tab. It's a switch right here. It's going to line up in this groove right here. So that groove, you'll line the switch up into that groove. It's actually like a square hole, a rectangular. There's two, but there's one that's a little bit bigger. It'll slide onto that. So let me get a better, it's this one right here. And it'll line up with the switch. And it's in the back position right now. So it slides forward, back, and then you'll see that there's a little clip sticking out on the side here. That is going to line up into this groove down here. It's a little slider. It's going to line up into that. So just get that in first, and then you'll see kind of where it needs to go. The tricky thing is just getting it right on to the switch. And once it slides on there, it just kind of goes in. So, and then right up in here at this, the upper end where the actual switch button is that slides, it just sits down into a groove. You get a better view of that. Just kind of help it in there. You can kind of see right in here. So let's just make sure that it slides. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take the other housing and go ahead and start putting it back together. So the cord in, make sure you've got the cord in its groove there. So your cord should look like that at the end. All right, so I've got the housing on. It was a little tricky trying to get the switch to line up because it didn't want to slide nice and easy. So I did have some troubles trying to make sure that both housings were together properly and there was adequate spacing up here where the speed box is, where it's got the speed control. So anyhow, I finally got it on there. So I'm going to go ahead and install the screws and tighten up both the casing back up. All right, so the housing's back together. I'm going to let the tool sit for about 24 hours so that the glue, the epoxy, has time to cure. The directions say that it has a set time in about 4 to 6 hours, and it cures in 15 to 24 hours, depending on the temperature. So it says allow 4 to 6 hours before handling whatever it is you're gluing. And then it says minimum 15 hours before putting the object back in use. So I'm just going to go ahead and wait 24 hours. I'm sure it'll be nice and solid then. I've used JB Weld many times, and as long as you wait what the instructions tell us to, you'll have a nice solid epoxy cure. So we'll go ahead and let this sit out, and then we'll come back and put it to test. All right, it's been 24 hours since we put the housing back together and we glued it with the JB Weld product, and we're ready to put this thing to use and test it and see how well it's going to perform after doing the glue. So let's go ahead and get the glue out of the way. I'm going to use this Fein tool. So it has a few missing teeth, but for the most part, it's nice, and it's a good blade, and it's a wood blade, kind of an aggressive blade. So I'm going to put that in here. I got some 1-inch oak tread that we're going to use to test it out, because instead of using some pine, I'm going to use 1 inch. I want to make sure that this thing is nice and solid. It's a good solid fix so that you can see how well JB Weld works. All right, so I got that in there. Let me just show you here that it's 1 inch thick oak wood. So let's go ahead and make a pass. Little smoke. Happy with the way it performs. Like I said, it actually wasn't working that well for quite some time, and I wasn't really paying attention to those screws. But as they loosen up, you don't get the oscillating vibration up at the head here, so you lose a lot of that, and so therefore it doesn't cut the way it used to. So after gluing that and making it solid and having this housing, the head connected solid to the housing, boy, it cut through that oak like a breeze. Obviously the blade has a lot to do with it too, but let me just get down here and show you. So there's the cut. There's about a 2 inch deep cut this direction, about 1.5 inches. So 1 inch thick, and it cut through that like a breeze. So hope this video helped you so that you can fix your Fein tool. And I'll have the description down below of the JB Weld where you can locate it so that you can fix your Fein tool. Thank you for watching You Can Do It. Stay tuned for the next video.